just make sure you're prepared, right? Seek out information. Make sure you start planning early.
Turning 65 comes with a lot of milestones. And for a lot of people, one of those milestones is healthcare, and in particular, Medicare. And for many, it brings more questions than answers. So today, we're going to cut through the confusion, explain the decisions you'll face, and talk about how to approach Medicare with confidence instead of stress. Hello, and welcome to Money on Your Mind from Edelman Financial Engines. I'm Michael Liersch, a behavioral scientist, financial planner, and chief planning officer at EFE. Thanks for joining us for a conversation about how people are feeling about money, what they're wrestling with, and how financial planning can help you straighten things out. Today, we're talking with Rob Bain, head of insurance at Edelman Financial Engines. Rob has spent decades helping people navigate insurance decisions and understands the questions that come up most often when people are approaching retirement, especially in the topic of Medicare. So Rob, welcome to Money on Your Mind.
Thanks, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
So Rob, you've been in this business for decades and helping clients at EFE for about a decade. Yeah. What do you love most about your interactions with clients, helping them plan? What is it that you're passionate about?
I'm passionate about protecting our clients, helping them understand what their insurance needs really look like and what's the best way for them to address those needs specifically, making sure they get it right.
Now, when we think of something like Medicare specifically, and we transition into what everyone's joining this podcast to listen to, you talk with people about insurance every single day. So tell us, what are the biggest questions or concerns you're hearing about from people when they're nearing retirement, especially in the zone of Medicare?
Yeah, so Medicare causes a lot of stress, as you mentioned, right? Because it's a complicated product, if you will, or insurance coverage. And there are lots of deadlines and there are penalties if you miss a deadline. I think people who are getting to that, retirement age of 65 or older, enrolling in Medicare creates a lot of questions for them. Like, when do I enroll? How do I enroll? What's the right plan for me? What's it going to cost? And unfortunately for those people, a lot of times they're going to their mailbox and they're being bombarded with direct mail pieces from seems like every Medicare broker under the sun. So, that probably leads to more questions about, well, who should I really be talking to about this? I would say that my recommendation would be you want to be talking to a broker that sees all of the plans available on the market, can show all those plans to you, and then help filter those down to an actionable list based on things like your doctors and your medications. And then an additional layer to that, I would say, is you want a broker who's going to give you an honest breakdown of traditional Medicare versus Medicare Advantage. Because again, Medicare Advantage is highly marketed by insurance companies and agents, and they tout how it sometimes can be premium free and you get a gym membership and shiny objects like that. But quite often, the coverage is somewhat limited in some respects too. So we'll talk more about that later on in our conversation today.
So all our listeners like to go back to the foundations. What should they be doing first? Give us like that procedure.
So Part A is covering hospitals. So if you need to go to a hospital, your Part A is covering those charges. And then there's Part B. Part B is going to pay for your doctors and the tests that they run. And then we pivot over to Part D. And Part D is going to cover prescriptions. So that one's easy. Part D is drugs. You'll notice I skipped over Part C. It's an all-in-one package that insurance companies can sell as an alternative to that traditional Medicare, as we call it. And so Part C is called Medicare Advantage, and that's what we mentioned before. So Medicare Advantage is a private plan you buy through an insurance carrier that's not the federal traditional plan.
So that's a lot of information to process.
Yeah.
So A, B, D,
Yeah.
and then potentially C.
Right.
So when you think of all these letters and you think of a listener taking a lot of notes and thinking to themselves, I'm already feeling stressed just hearing this.
Yeah.
Which part do you feel from a foundational standpoint, A, B, or D in particular out of the gate is
Yeah.
most critical to attend to first?
Well, you're almost always going to enroll in all three together. There are some situations where you might be enrolling in Part A first and then following with B and D later. We'll talk more about that. But really, it comes down to more of what your needs are. So again, traditional Medicare, you can think of it, again, Part A, B, and D. You could think of that as like having PPO insurance while you're at work,
Okay.
where you have the freedom to go to a specialist. You have coverage both in network and out of network. And then Part C, the Medicare Advantage alternative, think of that more like HMO, where now you're somewhat limited. You're going to have to go through a gatekeeper maybe to get a referral to a specialist, and you're only going to have coverage in network. So I think
see.
that's the best thing that we can share with people is to understand those details.
Okay, so it really is then important first to assess your needs, your doctors, your health situation, your circumstances,
Right.
before jumping right into the evaluation process. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that's very important. So let's go next to enrollment. So how should people think about enrollment periods? And you talked about deadlines and all these different types of things. So let's get into that.
So the first enrollment period is when you turn 65. That's called your initial enrollment period. And it's a 7-month period that starts before the month you turn 65 and continues on. Think of it like a sandwich. So there's 3 months before the month you turn 65 and another 3 months after the month you turn 65. So if I'm turning 65 in June, I can enroll in Medicare as early as March or as late as the end of September. So that's your initial enrollment period. But for many people, they're going to continue working at 65. And if that's the case, then you're going to have a special enrollment period. That's going to take place whenever you decide to retire and leave that group. So you're leaving that group plan, let's say at age 68. When you do that, you're going to have an 8-month special enrollment period that starts the month you leave the plan. So the month you leave the plan and 7 additional months after you leave the plan to enroll in Medicare without penalty.
Wow, Rob. So we usually get into mistakes later on, but I just want to emphasize that information. What's a mistake you see people making in terms of, navigating those enrollment periods? Can you highlight that really quickly for us?
Yes, there's a couple. Number one, a lot of people who are working past age 65 might hear from a coworker that, oh, I enrolled in Part A because it's premium free and I can have it while I'm working. And while that is true, there's an important limitation, and that is HSA contributions. So if you're in a high deductible plan and contributing to an HSA, you can't enroll in Medicare. If you do, coverage A is retroactive for 6 months. So technically speaking, you'd have to stop HSA contributions at least 6 months before you enroll in Part A. If you fail to do that and you went ahead and enrolled in Part A while you were making HSA contributions, now you have a very complicated and messy process to claw back those 6 months of contributions so you don't get penalized.
Okay. Wow.
Another example I would say is going back to the fact that you can delay enrolling in Medicare while you're working. There's an important distinction there too, and that is the size of your employer. So you've got to be working at a company with at least 20 employees.
Okay.
If you're working for a small business with less than 20 employees, you cannot delay Medicare enrollment past age 65.
That's an important one, Rob.
It is, right. And then a small adjacent one is that if you're already receiving Social Security benefits, you're going to be enrolled automatically at 65.
Okay, got it. And help us think about those people who have a differential in age with their spouse? Like, how should they be navigating these types of considerations?
Yeah, that comes up a lot, as you might imagine.
I do.
You know,
My in-laws, are in that situation, so I'm
yeah,
with you.
yeah. So when the older spouse enrolls in Medicare, whether that happens at age 65 or later, if the younger spouse is under 65, we're going to have to find something to bridge the gap until they are able to enroll in Medicare. And normally you've got two choices there. It's either going to be the younger spouse takes COBRA, or the younger spouse goes out to the marketplace and finds an ACA type policy to insure them until they can jump into Medicare.
Got it. Okay. So tell us, are there any special considerations that we can help our listeners think through? For example, federal employees, those who've served in the military or are in the military. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, we have a lot of clients that are military and federal retirees. Let's tackle the military first because that's pretty simple.
Okay.
Your military retirees are going to use what's called TRICARE for Life as their Medicare supplement and their prescription drug coverage. And Medicare or TRICARE for Life, requires enrollment in both Part A and Part B. So your military retirees are simple. Whenever that happens, whether it's at 65 or later, they're going to enroll in Part A and Part B, and they're going to use TRICARE for Life as their supplement and their prescription drug plan.
Okay.
Federal employees are a different story. So your federal employment retirees are going to use what's called FEHB, Federal Employee Health Benefits, as their Medicare supplement and their prescription drug plan. And they have to enroll in Part A. The sticky part comes with whether or not they should enroll in Part B, because for them it's optional. And generally, I think the way people need to look at this as if there could be a big gap between what FEHB will cover and what Part B would cover, then maybe it makes sense to pay a Part B premium and get that coverage to fill that gap. But as you know, Part B premiums go up as your income increases. So for those retirees that are going to have really high income, they're going to pay a higher Part B premium. So maybe that Part B premium now is larger than that gap we were hoping to fill. So the general guidelines for those federal retirees is to speak with your benefits, your Medicare benefits officer for your department, and kind of peel back that onion a little bit more so you understand which direction you might want to go.
How early should people start thinking about Medicare coverage before they actually need it? What's your advice there, Rob? Because this sounds like a lot.
Yeah, I would definitely say at least a year before you're planning to retire.
When do you think within that year timeframe most people start finalizing their decisions? Is it like 6 months in, 8 months in? And I'm just highlighting it, Rob, because some people are listening and they're thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, I'm in the decision right now and I just started thinking about it. Am I too late?
Yeah. So, I mean, ideally, like you said, a year out, at least 6 months out. If we go back to that conversation we just had about HSA contributions, right? So, you've got to stop those 6 months before you enroll. So if you are in fact in a high deductible plan and making those, you need to be doing this planning a year out so that you could stop those contributions 6 months before your enrollment. So that's a mistake that some people make, is that they wait until maybe a month or two before they're going to enroll to start understanding and talking to a broker and learning about it. And now maybe it's a little too late and they're going to have to deal with those HSA clawbacks.
Got it. And so that's unavoidable, but it's doable. So the goal here is to try to avoid as many mistakes as possible. So let's just hop right into the one key mistake that you really want to outline.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what we talked about before with they get bombarded with advertisements and they see, Joe Namath, whoever on TV talking about how great Medicare Advantage is, and then they don't take the time to meet with somebody who's going to really give them an honest breakdown of how traditional Medicare would work versus a Medicare Advantage plan. I think that's important. Also, for those who are already over 65 or enrolled in Medicare already, doing a periodic review of your prescription drug coverage, your coverage D, is really important. Obviously, it's important if your medications change, right? If your prescriptions change. But even if your prescriptions don't change, the carrier you're with could change their formularies, and all of a sudden, you're paying more for a prescription this year than you did last year. So for those who are already enrolled in Medicare, every year or two, you need to be taking a closer look at that Part D coverage.
And so how do you bring in other family members who might be able to help support that decision making? Have you seen that work, and what does that look like?
It can work, but it's important to also take whatever you learn from a conversation with your family members. Maybe you have an older sibling who's gone through it, right? And you're picking their brain a little bit. I think it's important to also understand that, some of those dynamics that may have made the course of action different for your older sibling. For example, the size of company they worked for is an example we already talked about, right? Or the fact whether or not they're on a high deductible plan making HSA contributions. So, their path might be different than yours because of those details. So I would say talk to family and friends, certainly, but then go to a financial planner and a Medicare broker who can really help you understand, how those details may or may not apply to you in your specific situation.
So maybe that leads us perfectly into one action everyone should take right now who's listening to this podcast or viewing it. What's that advice?
Definitely speaking to a financial planner and a unbiased Medicare broker. A Medicare broker who's going to, again, show you all of the plans that are available in the market, not only present the carriers that they're appointed with kind of thing. So they're going to give you that broad view of all the plans available to you. And again, giving you an honest breakdown of traditional Medicare versus Medicare Advantage is really critical. You need to be making a fully informed decision there about which path is best.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for being on the podcast. Any last words for everyone who's thinking about Medicare? Any last words for them?
Just make sure you're prepared, right? Seek out information. Make sure you start planning early. And, if you understand what the deadlines are, then you won't have so much stress about missing one.
Okay. Planning. We're not ironic here, Rob. Plan.
That's right.
So that's everything we have for you today. This has been Money on Your Mind. A big thanks to Rob Bain, head of insurance, for joining me. And we'll be back next Wednesday with a new episode. Subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube so you don't miss it. And hey, if you leave us a rating too, we'd really appreciate it. I'm Michael Liersch from Edelman Financial Engines. Talk to you next time.